My mic was muted. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. Thank you for joining me today, whether you are watching me live here or if you are watching the recording. We appreciate you showing up and supporting the show. This is a live Q&A style show where we answer questions from our users about DFS, about SaberSim. Sometimes we banter and tilt our lineups a little bit. Really whatever makes sense for that day. I'm live here for a reason. I want clarifying questions. I want follow-up questions. I want you guys to be a part of the conversation. So as I'm talking through things, this doesn't need to be a one-way street. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, pop them into either our Office Hours channel in Slack or into YouTube chat. I'll pull some comments up on stream and talk about some things and answer follow-up questions here. So we also host the show daily, Monday to Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern here in this time slot. It is daily for a reason. It's not a tout show. It's not a pick show, but I will pull up the slates that we've got today and use them to talk about and answer questions related to how to use SaberSim and general DFS strategy. So, yeah, on Thursdays, typically, we use this time slot for what we're calling strategy sessions, where we'll pull in other members from the SaberSim team and do a deep dive into a specific sport or contest type or DFS concept or whatever. This week, we actually hosted that on Wednesday. It was for the U.S. Open. Max and I did a strategy session about PGA DFS strategy. So we are now approaching the end or at least the middle of round 2 for the U.S. Open here. And I am very much sweating Cameron Smith's cut. He's in a lot of my lineups. But that video is useful for PGA DFS strategy in general. So if you are interested in golf DFS, whether you have been playing for a long time or are just starting to get into it, go check that video out. It is up on our YouTube channel. And we have 3 other strategy sessions from the previous 3 weeks related to esports DFS that I've been applying a little bit to some League of Legends lineups today. I've been starting to dabble in the esports scene. We've done a NBA playoff DFS showdowns and short slates strategy session. It's a great video. I know we're still getting a ton of questions about these NBA DFS slates, so go check that one out. And the first strategy session we ever did was a sports betting strategy session, walking through our sports betting product, overall sports betting strategies, and also how to apply sports betting strategies to your DFS play. So if you are not even a big sports bettor, or maybe it's not legal where you are, but you play a lot of DFS and want to add another level to your game, you can go and watch that video. We talk about some signals that you can get from the betting markets and Vegas overall to influence your DFS play. So I've referenced that show a lot here on stream, talking about ways to edit projections and things like that. So anyway, let's see. It is Friday here. We've got a few questions in our queue. Again, not too many in the queue. Weekend Warrior said, good morning. It's Friday. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, so I've got a couple questions to answer here. We'll take our time on these because there's not too many in the queue, but if you have a question or you have something you've been meaning to ask, or maybe waiting until there's not such a busy day on office hours here, today's a good day to ask it. If you have just something that you want to talk about, or again, I've mentioned it before, even if it's not so much of a question and just kind of a concept or a thought or an idea or something that you just want to throw out and kick around a little bit, go ahead and shoot it into the Slack channel. We'll talk a little bit about it on stream today. But we do have some questions here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I think both of these came in yesterday or maybe earlier this morning. So let's get our first question in here. Okay, this question was from Buffbeard in Office Hours Slack. He said, if I build one lineup for a small single entry contest, why is the pool only 25 lineups? What's going on in the background? So I'm going to talk about this here. I'm going to go ahead and first pull up SaberSim here. Okay, cool. So I've got the app pulled up here. I'm going to start at a fairly basic level here and explain some things just so I for folks that maybe aren't as familiar with what's going on here, I'm going to just go ahead and run a default build with single entry settings. Let me update my projections here so we can run our build. So if you're going in and you're building a single lineup for a single entry, and you come in here and maybe you're playing something that's approximately 5,000 entrants or something like that, a lot of those are pretty typical. You've got this set to build one lineup. We're going to go ahead and hit build. And something that can be a little bit surprising, especially to very new users using SaberSim or their very first build, is that we are actually going to, it's going to take a little bit longer, and we're actually going to build more than just one lineup, right? We are building 25 lineups, and you can see that here. Lineups 1, right? There's one lineup here that's been selected to be in our pool. Our pool size is 25 lineups. So we built 25 lineups. And you can actually, I've talked about this a little bit on stream here. You can actually update this to read 25. Oops, excuse me. And you can actually see all 25 lineups that were built, right? And the purpose of this is twofold, really. But the primary purpose, I guess, is to allow you to make changes to, especially if you're playing multi-entry, but also true for single entry, to be able to change exposures, exclude players, update your stack types without having to run another build. So say, for example, this was your actual build and you ran your one lineup and it spit out a 4-2-2 stack. And you looked at this and you said, wait, it's a 15-game slate. I want a 5 stack. You can do that in just a second pretty much here by just removing certain stack types that aren't 5 stacks. Which are not the first few, but there we go, right? So very quickly, without building any more lineups, we just removed some of the top lineups. We're now at our 4th best lineup here. And I know that the other question in my queue is about Saber Score here. So these are going to be really related questions today. But you can see, because we built 25 up front, it was very easy for us to just say, remove the first few and give me the best 5 stack, right? Now we have a 5 stack. You can do this really for a wide variety of uses too, right? Like you could also come at this from the standpoint of a pitcher. Someone that I think is going to be really chalky tonight is Robbie Ray, actually. I don't like playing Robbie Ray when he's chalky. So maybe if I was doing this for my particular pool, I might be able to then go ahead and select X him out, right? I'm just putting 0 as the maxed exposure for some of these guys and crossing guys out. So now all of a sudden still haven't built any more lineups, but now I've got another single entry contest that features a 5 stack. I removed a pitcher and I didn't have to build any more lineups, right? So if you guys are familiar, I know most of you probably are with like building 20 or 150 lineups, right? That's really where you start to see some of this power, when you've got a big pool of 1,500 lineups for your 150 max contest or something like that. And as you're adjusting exposures or updating min and maximum exposures, doing all of that without having to run additional builds is a massive time saver. So that is the primary motivation for why we build extra lineups. I did notice, Buff Beard, I don't know if you're watching me live here, the way you wrote this question, if I build one lineup for a small single entry contest, why is the pool only 25 lineups? What's going on in the background? The use of the word only there actually made me think that maybe you wanted some more rather than just building 25 here. Maybe if you're used to playing a lot of the more max entry stuff, maybe you're used to seeing a bigger number there. We typically scale this based on the total number of lineups you're actually asking for. But if you want this number to be larger, you can pretty much kind of just inflate it by asking for more lineups. So a very easy thing to do, especially this is what I do when I'm playing single entry, is I will just request 20. We'll let this build again. We'll use the same settings. We'll still use single entry settings. But since we're asking for 20 with these settings, it's probably going to build us somewhere between 200 and 500. That is a very easy way to just have the builder build you extra lineups, even if you aren't going to use them. So we'll let this build for a second here and see what comes out. All right. Okay, so you can see, yeah, we've gotten up to here about 500, right? So if you want a bigger backlog of lineups here to work with, for the purposes of actually just building a single entry lineup, I think it's probably pretty unlikely that you ever even get close to like getting to the back half of this pool this large. Even if you were building 20 lineups, right? I think a lot of times users don't even get to some of the bottom lineups here at the end of the pool. But just with the way you wrote that question here, why is the pool only 25 lineups? That really is up to you as the user. If you want to have the builder build more lineups, you can do so by basically just asking for more. The only reason we build 25 when you ask for one, for example, is mostly speed, right? We don't necessarily need to make every user wait around to build 500 lineups when they ask for one. So we build 25 and go from there. But you can always get more if you want them built. So cool. So I mentioned that was kind of the primary reason why we build extra lineups, right? I think there is a bit of a secondary reason. It's also a bit of a good segue into the next question I have here. And that is regarding Saber Score. So I'm going to pull up this next question here. Andrew asked this morning. He said, can we go over Saber Score? I still don't have a complete understanding of this ranking method, right? So really, like, talking about this here, we'll use this build again since I have a few additional more lineups, right? If we are going to build extra lineups, right? The origin of Saber Score, I guess, really here is that if we're going to build additional lineups to make editing exposures and stack types and things like that easier for the user, we need to have a way to properly sort those lineups and decide which are the 20 that a user actually is going to get going to the top, right? A traditional optimizer is going to use something like projected score, right? First of all, a traditional optimizer is also going to build your lineups by optimizing for median outcome or mean outcome, or actually it is mean projected score, right? But it is also going to typically sort your lineups in the order of the mean projected score, right? Your highest projected lineup is going to be top, then the second is going to be 2, then the third is going to be 3, right? But just as we don't want to build lineups, we don't want to construct lineups based on mean projection, we also don't want to sort and select our lineups of the pool based on mean projection, right? And that is kind of the origin of what Saber Score is, right? And this is a really important nuance that I think is maybe more of an intermediate kind of SaberSim type concept here, right? But when you go in and set your build settings here in the pre-build process, and you are picking values for correlation and ownership fade and smart diversity. Speaking of which, in yesterday's office hours, I spent almost a full hour diving really deep into what these slider settings are doing. If you are new to SaberSim, getting familiar with how they work, and some things that you can play around with here. So I'm going to kind of assume a general understanding of the sliders here. But if you aren't very familiar with what these are actually doing, I highly recommend jumping back to yesterday's office hours, taking a look and giving that a watch. But what's happening here is we're setting our build settings, right? So we've got a correlation value, an ownership value, and a smart diversity value. And that is impacting, first off, the way the lineups themselves are constructed, right? So a player's projection from the sims that were selected in the form of smart diversity integrates with that player's ownership projection, determining kind of how well owned they're going to be, and their correlation to other players that may already be in the lineup when determining each individual player that's going to get slotted into a lineup when that lineup is constructed, right? What Saber Score is doing is it's providing essentially another layer of reinforcing those ideas of correlation and ownership and upside by sorting the lineups as wholes amongst the greater pool, right? So lineups, as they are being constructed within SaberSim, are treating players on an individual player-by-player basis, right? A player is determined whether or not they're going to go next into the lineup one by one. Using Saber Score in this post-build process as a way of sorting this allows us one extra degree of I don't know what the right word is for it, capturing the effects of correlation and ownership and upside, because it then starts to look at those things in the lineup as a whole, right? So we might select low-owned players across an entire lineup build and end up with a lineup that maybe is overly low-owned or over-leveraged for the contest, and that actually can maybe bring the Saber Score down a little bit. Similarly, in baseball, the effects of correlation stack really well one on another, right? I think one thing people are sometimes surprised about is that the individual correlation between any two batters is not as sky high as you might expect, right? These are correlations of anywhere from like 0.15 to 0.25. These things are not even as strong as a correlation from an NFL quarterback to his wide receiver a lot of times. But the impact of these correlations stack on each other across a lineup, right? So when we have 5 Milwaukee bats, right? Narvaez is correlated with Garcia, Yelich, Adams, Urias, right? Basically the entire lineup. Garcia is correlated with Yelich, Narvaez, Vogelbach, and so on, right? These correlations have a stacking effect. And Saber Score is our attempt to quantify the impacts of your build settings being set where they are for correlation, ownership fade, smart diversity into a single number that basically describes how good of a lineup we think it is for the contest. That's essentially what Saber Score is trying to do, right? So Saber Score is always standardized to 100. We feel like the lineup that best balances your particular mix of correlation, ownership fade, and smart diversity in your lineup is always given a score of 100, right? From there, the Saber scores are scaled appropriately down, right? And you'll see, I think, typically the lineups. This is another reason why we build extra lineups too, right? So this is the secondary reason, right? You'll see if we look at our pool of 500 lineups, the entire pool of lineups we've built are probably viable for your contest, right? They're probably good, strong lineups. But you can see the Saber score of the 500th lineup we built is 74, right? Again, this is a lineup that maybe is viable for the contest. It doesn't look as great personally, I would think, down here with the 2-2 stack. I don't love this lineup, but you can see it's got maybe some really low-owned plays in this. It's understandable based on the lineup settings how this lineup might have been constructed, right? But then when we go ahead and just look at our pool of 20, we're going to see a set of lineups that all have Saber scores within the top, 6% of the lineups built-ish. And they're all going to look really viable, really nice for this contest. They're all going to have really good stack sizing, right? That's the secondary purpose, I would say, of building extra lineups, is to allow Saber Score some room to maneuver. So, yeah, those two questions just go really well together. I kind of answered them in conjunction with one another because they're very much related, right? So when you're building a set of lineups, you're always going to get extra lineups built for you. It allows you to make changes to your exposures and projections and stack types and all kinds of things that you want to do after your build without having to run a new build or build new lineups. And it also allows us some time to get some value out of Saber Score, right? Which is a way of taking of a set of lineups all produced with build rules that take into account correlation, ownership fade, and upside in the form of smart diversity. This allows us to quantify which ones do it best. It would be a little anticlimactic, I guess, to have this awesome build logic about the way the lineup builder itself actually works, and then sort the lineups that come out of it by projected score or something like that, right? That would kind of go completely counterintuitive. So with that said, we do offer projected score as an option here. You can sort your lineups by projected score. I think there are sports where you can justify this. And what you're essentially going to do, you're still going to be working from a pool of lineups that were built taking into account correlation, ownership fade, and upside. You are just only instead going to sort by the ones with the highest projected score at the end, right? And you'll see, right? We're not going to all of a sudden just lose all of our stacks. We may get some smaller stacks because these lineups may have higher projected scores, but we still have some pretty good lineups. These are lineups that are probably still viable for the contest. Where I think this can actually be really useful, where I personally use it, is if I'm already doing a lot of things on the sorting side to guarantee a certain amount of leverage and correlation in my lineup. So, for example, I may sort by projected score, but then say I only want lineups that are extremely well correlated and start removing some of the smaller stacks, because those lineups are going to come up more often when sorting by projected score. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I wanted the 5 stack. So I may go in and do something like this, right? So I'm sorting by projected score. I'm not sorting by Saber Score, but I'm forcing the builder to choose lineups that are extremely well correlated. And then from there, maybe even forcing to choose lineups that are relatively low owned, right? So I know the Brewers are still at Coors today. I think they're going to be popular. No one's going to be mega popular, I hope, on a 15-game slate, but maybe I'm removing some of the most popular teams and then telling the builder to sort by projected score. Similarly, when you sort by projected score, one thing that can happen is it doesn't look like we're getting it too bad here, but you can potentially start to see, so this is a decent example, right? Jesus Sanchez here, batting projected 5th spot at min salary, has just a ridiculous point per dollar value. So he's showing up in almost 50% of our lineups, right? We're sorting by projected score, so we're getting a guy like that a lot. One of the final things you can do is cap some of your exposures here, especially to some of those guys that are just really awesome point per dollar plays, and make sure they are not completely dominating your lineup. So, oops. But anyway, as a beginner, just getting familiar, I think sorting by Saber Score is probably the best option in most sports. I would say I use it 90 to 95% of the time. There are some niche cases where you might want to use projected score, especially if you're already forcing lineups to be correlated or well leveraged in terms of ownership or high upside on your own in terms of your own selection process going alongside that. So Andrew or Buffbeard, I don't know if either of you guys are watching along. Again, kind of answered those two questions in combination. I think they were very well related. I think it was very easy to tie those things together, but hopefully I didn't sacrifice the answer of one to benefit the other or anything like that. So let me know if you guys feel like those questions were well answered. If you have any follow-up questions watching the recording of this, or if you're watching live here, just let me know. But yeah. With that said, really just kind of a quick, okay, Andrew's here. Andrew's a regular on the show. Appreciate you always tuning in. Good. I'm glad that was clear. Yeah, we got about 22 minutes in here. Quiet day on questions so far. Those are the two I had in my queue. So not a lot that has come in through the support inbox either. I don't have a lot else to go over. Anyone else have any other questions or anything like that you'd like to talk about a little bit? Anybody watch the PGA DFS strategy session and apply some concepts into their lineups for the US Open? And how's everyone's US Open lineups looking? I haven't checked in a little bit. I was going to keep an eye on it. I have a fairly tight core compared to what I normally do. Rahm and Scheffler are in there, and they both are looking good. And then, unfortunately, Cam Smith is the third golfer in my core. They're in quite a few of my lineups. I would say I think every lineup has at least one. Most have two, and a few have all three. And I'm really sweating Cam Smith, who got off to a rough start today. So, but didn't mean to do that. Anyway, any other questions for me here today? We've got plenty of time. All right, here we go. Here's another question from Andrew here. If I run a build, let's say now, and then MLB lineups come out later and players are out, it seems Saber will pick a different lineup but not completely update my pool to exclude those players. Is it better to just make a new build altogether? I would say yes, it is always better to run a new build. Let's run one real quick and use this as an example here. And we can talk a little bit about why that is too. So I want a little bigger contest here. So we will, let me run the build here and then I'll kind of talk about all the nuance here and everything to think about. But this is a good question. I probably could have just used the previous build now that I'm thinking about it, but that's fine. We'll get a fresh build. Okay, so we have our build here, right? We're all set. And later, after all the lineup cards come out, all of our sims are going to rerun. Projections are going to update here and there. And you can go in and click this refresh button, and it will pull in the latest projections that we have from the most recently run sims for all the players. And it will resort your lineups by Saber Score again, right? Which is a pretty nice feature, especially if you have a build that you've done a lot of work on and something happens and you want to update. The main thing to note here, though, is that we don't rebuild any lineups, right? So the original lineups are still, of your pool of 500, they are still what they are, right? We are just giving you maybe a different 20 based on the way the projections have updated. So you can run into trouble here. In particular in a sport, I mean, obviously in baseball, if someone's not in the lineup, right, that can be a pretty big concern. Let's say Semien or something like that was not going to play tonight. He's in 25% or so of our entire pool of 500. When you come back and resort this, you won't get any Semien lineups in your top lineups here, which is great, especially if you're on a time crunch. But you've thrown away 123 viable lineups of your pool in terms of what you can sort. This can actually be, baseball is not even a great example of this. This can be really dangerous in a sport like basketball or something like that, where, you know, in baseball, our entire lineup pools actually are very well spread out comparatively. But in basketball, you can build 500 lineups and literally get 100% of a player in all 500, right? If that player were then to be ruled out, we would resort and we would re-optimize the lineups, but you would still have that player in your lineups. You have a player that's not playing because we didn't build anymore, right? So I would say by and large, it is always best when you have the time to do so, to rerun your build. Don't start with an old build from earlier and just refresh projections. I would always recommend rebuilding, right? And that's going to allow, it's also going to allow us to, like, there are impacts of a player getting ruled out, right? So especially in a sport like basketball, where if Giannis or something like that is out, it impacts the way the rest of the Bucks are projected. You probably want more of those players. It will allow lineups to be rebuilt with the impacts of all of that new news. So very important to build new lineups. This can still be useful in the case where there can be very minor news that comes out, right? Like one thing that often pops up in our MLB Sims alert channel is we will get that sim that reruns because the umpire gets announced, right? We take into account umpires in our model. It is a fairly minor factor. It's not going to have an overwhelming change on the way a player or team is projected comparatively. But it does slightly tweak things. If you've already built your lineups and your projections and ownerships and or exposures are all really nicely dialed in and you're pretty happy with your build, and then you see a couple sims run because the umpires got changed, or something that's not really going to have a dramatic impact on the players, or you're not going to have players that are out as a response of that, that can be a really nice use case for just going in, refreshing your projections, and re-updating from there. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. I would say almost all the time, right? It should really be one new build as close to lock as you can manage while still getting everything you need to do in your individual process in time. But it is useful to know that you can go into any build, click this, update it, and get some of those very minor sim changes. I know hockey is another one. There's like a final sim that runs 10 to 15 minutes before the game starts for almost every hockey game. A lot of times there won't be any player news that's changed. Nothing really is dramatic. There's no players out. The lines aren't different. The goalies weren't different, but there's just kind of one final sim that runs. I like to use it there too, so I know I have the latest of every game going into lock. So cool. Let's see. Another question here from Andrew. I've used late swap a couple times, and is there a way to get it to build more than one lineup? Late swap is going to build you as many lineups as it notices in your contests, right? So let's go ahead. I'll actually just pull in my contest entries in here and we'll talk about this. So my entries file for tonight, right? I don't even think I have. I think I just reserved. Yeah, I did. So I don't have any lineups. I essentially have one completely blank lineup in all of my contests right now. So if I click late swap, it's going to say one and it's going to be grayed out, right? It's only going to let you late swap one lineup. If we go ahead, though, and fill this, let's just fill it with the most recent build. This is best practice anyway. I hate that I do this. I always recommend you should put placeholders in because there's inevitably that one day where the internet goes down or something crazy that happens. And you can't, if you go into lock with reserved entries, you're just hosed. You can't make updates. You can't late swap. You just don't get to set a lineup. So it always is best to at least have a lineup that is semi-viable in there. And the entry editor makes it so easy, right? This whole thing takes like 5 seconds, but I have such a bad habit of not doing this. But anyway, I'll go ahead. Oh, man. I just realized I haven't been sharing my screen since... Oh, no. Man. I can't believe that. I don't think it was the most important thing in the last question. I had a build up that I was talking about a little bit here. Man, hopefully it was still helpful just watching my dumb face here and listening to me talk. I wasn't sharing my screen through answering that last question. But I don't think there was anything that I was like particularly doing in terms of like functionality here that would have been too important. But a few things that I did point out was just like looking at your entire pool and like you can see if Cobb got ruled out or something like that, who we have 37% of 185 lineups, we would just lose those lineups if he got ruled out and we updated the refresh here. Andrew says listening is fine. That's good. I'm glad that was a question that was mostly easy to explain just with my words here and I wasn't demoing something. That would have been a pain, but not a big deal. Anyway, I have my screen up here now. So yeah, let's talk about this here. So what I was showing when the screen wasn't working is late swap. Let's see. Okay, well, now it's... All right. Well, that's okay. Before I had updated my entries, this said number of lineups 1, right? And what I was saying was that the reason for this is because I had just reserved all of my entries. I hadn't put any real lineups in. So it is just going to late swap the number of lineups that it actually it notices, right? And that's intentional, right? Like we want, if a player goes in at lock and plays one lineup in all of their single entries, and that lineup is also their first lineup into all their 3 maxes and their first lineup into all their 20 maxes, right? Someone using like the rank fill method that wants to use their highest Saber score lineup in every contest. We want to make sure that pattern is maintained, right? And it works the same for somebody filling with unique, right? Somebody that's building a unique lineup for every single entry they're playing that night, we'll late swap that. But what happens, and this does come up as a question a lot for users, is especially people that just go in and are playing with the late swap for the first time, is you'll see sometimes this will say 1. And the question is like, why does it only say 1? Why can I only late swap 1 lineup? Once you fill your entries and actually have real lineups in your pool, this should update to the number of lineups that it perceives, right? And this is also per sort here, I guess, right? So like if I look at my multiplier, just my micro boosters, now it's only going to pick up the 10, right? These are the 10 lineups I'm playing in the micro booster contests. So that is the way that works. I know this is wrong. I think Kurt reported this earlier this week. This is not showing up quite right. So, but that's the way late swap works. Hopefully that was helpful. What a noob moment for me. Failing to have my screen share up here. I been hosting these here for about a month now. I should be an expert, but yeah. Hopefully that was mostly clear here. I don't think there was really anything else that I was really even showing off on my screen, but Yeah, great questions. Anyone else? Let me check Slack. I haven't checked Slack in a minute. Will said, sorry, cat on my keyboard about a half hour ago. I don't know what Will's talking about. Maybe you type something, some random string of letters or something. Cool. Any other questions anyone has for me today here before we go into the weekend? We got plenty of slates going on this weekend. We've got still some playoff basketball and hockey and probably some pretty good baseball slates. We'll have an MMA card. What else is going on? League of Legends. Any questions for me here? We've got plenty of time. I'll give this a little more time here to see if any questions come in. And then, of course, if there aren't any, I'll hop off. But I will make myself available here the rest of the afternoon for you guys if there are questions that pop up. Seems to be all quiet here. Oh, here's one more. Nice. All right. If I'm entering a 10-game entry, is it better to just build for a 20 max and then just fill 10? That's not really going to make a huge difference here. I think there's not going to be a massive difference between asking the builder for 10 lineups versus 20 in terms of what you actually put in right here. I think the thing that maybe might have a small factor is the slider settings themselves, which is a question we get sometimes fairly often. If you're playing a 10 max, should your sliders be at the 3 max or the 20 max setting? The answer really there is that either's really fine. And again, once you kind of have a strong understanding, I meant on top, yes. So you're talking about these build settings here, right? Is it better to use like the 3 max or the 20 max? I assume that's what you mean. That's the way this question comes in pretty often. The answer again here is that either's fine, and it really just comes down to an understanding of what the sliders are doing, that you can kind of have a value judgment of what's best, right? At 20 max, our ownership fade is going to be just one tick higher, just very slightly less focus or a slight more focus on fading ownership. Smart diversity is going to go up one tick, right, for this particular contest size. So just slightly more upside based lineups at the expense of median performance. You sometimes will see if there's a middle ground here. So like what if instead of it being 2 and 5 and 3 and 6, say it was 2 and 5 and 4 and 7, you can go ahead and just set these at a middle ground, right? That also works just fine in between those two. I think I mentioned yesterday in our video or our office hours where we were talking a lot about sliders. One thing that's very useful when you have time and as a way to get more familiar with what the sliders are doing is start running builds just to practice with really extreme slider sets. And it will give you a little bit of security about what things look like even on the extremes, right? So like once you get familiar with what a 0 ownership fade lineup looks like with maybe default settings otherwise, and a 10 ownership fade lineup build looks like, it definitely gives you a little bit more security about updating these sliders here, right? Like the difference between 2 and 3 is very minor. And once you're very familiar with kind of how the sliders are working, you'll get to see that. So let's see. Here's another question. I'm going to just keep rolling here. If I'm manually adjusting sliders, is there any added value to setting my top parameters to the correct contest entry other than just knowing what Saber sets the sliders at? That is a great question. I'm actually surprised I haven't gotten that question before. So really, like the question here is do these drop downs here control anything other than just setting these sliders to a different setting? The answer is no, except for with one pretty big exception, right? When you use the cache setting option here, all the sliders drop to 0, and we use a slightly different optimizing method here, because it more reliably and more efficiently reproduces a actual mathematically optimal projection-based optimal lineup, which is what a lot of people want to run in cash, right? So the cash builder actually uses a very slightly different build logic. But apart from that, setting, so for example, like, is there any difference between having this at 20 and 10,000 to 50,000, which is 836, versus doing a single entry, something like this, right? And then going in and manually saying 836? The answer is no, right? These will do the exact same thing. Well, they'll build different lineups, of course, on a build-to-build basis because of smart diversity in the way our builder works. But what we're really focused on is actually these slider settings themselves. These are really just to help facilitate those selections. So the only exception there being if you select cash. I actually think maybe multiplier uses that same logic too. Not totally sure there. I know for a fact cash has a very slightly different build logic that is unique only to the cash builder to help it find that mathematical optimal faster. But since that's just simply not a concern for us at all with the GPP side, no, there's no difference there. These only help to pull up the defaults, basically. So, yeah, good question there. I'm surprised I haven't gotten that one before. That was a question I had at one point when I was kind of starting to get familiar with SaberSim. So that is a good one. That is also nice to know too. I mean, part of the main reason for that is it would be a huge pain if it did have a factor, especially if you were somebody that edits your slider settings, right? Like you would have to all of a sudden make sure you went in through the right point here, and there would be a difference between, there would be a lot of variables all of a sudden. Like 836 as your sliders wouldn't just be 836. There would be like the single entry version of 836 and the 20 max. It would be a mess. So I'm very, very happy we don't do it that way. But all right, Andrew single-handedly keeping it rolling here. Thank you for all the questions. What else we got? I know there are folks out there with questions you've been dying to ask at some point. I'm trying to see if there's anything that I think might be interesting or kind of fun to talk about here a little bit on show today. But we've covered a lot of topics. If you haven't seen them already, a lot of the videos, then the questions I answer on stream here are getting added to our support help desk, I guess, in the form of FAQs. So there's already been 20 or so questions that here I've snipped out that I answered live on stream and snipped them out and added to the FAQs. So hopefully they will be helpful to users and people that stumble upon those in the future. But it's been productive so far. I'm excited to keep this going here. I don't see any other questions wandering in here. So I think it might be about a good time to wrap things up. Did get a good solid 45 minutes out of the show here today. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up there. Again, I will be around in Slack in the Office Hours channel here at least through the end of the hour for the next 15 minutes, and then probably a little bit on and off through the end of the day here. If there are any questions, always happy to help. But if there are some questions that come in later this afternoon or later this evening or into the weekend, we will, of course, pick those right back up in our office hours on Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern, same time, same place here. So looking forward to chatting with everybody here on Monday and talking a little bit more. In the meantime, have a great weekend, everybody. Good luck in your U.S. Open lineups and whatever other lineups and contests you might be playing this weekend. Enjoy it, and I will see you guys next week. All right, bye-bye.